you weren't on the stream because you were kind of in the middle of it. For everyone listening, you want to give the insider's take on like kind of what happened and how it went down and your opinion on, whether we're going to see results.
I mean, in the largest sense, nothing happened, right? They held a caucus and then there was nothing.
But like, what went wrong with the caucus? What's the
Yeah, there's
mechanics?
a couple of issues here. People are focusing on the technology, and there's conflicting reports about all of this, right? And a lot of it's anecdotal. The Iowa Democrats are scrambling; they haven't been terribly forthcoming publicly. It doesn't seem in their interactions with the campaigns, because of course those leaked, including transcripts and audio. That's any better privately. They're trying to figure out what happened. So there's basically two parts. What's going on? One is the caucus itself. They changed a lot of rules. This was the result of 2016 and the Sanders campaign and their push for inclusion and transparency. And it seemed people had a lot of trouble adapting to it. One of the issues has been, we talked a lot about the alignments. You go, you show up, you have the first alignment, then you have the second alignment. And in past years, if your group was viable, say you voted for Pete Buttigieg and in your precinct you were viable, in the past, other unviable groups, non-viable groups could poach and bring you over. This year you weren't. If you were in a viable group after the first alignment, you were there. You were locked in. You could hand in your voting card and go. What it turned out is a lot of people at the precinct captain level seem to, or precinct chair level, I call it, seem to be doing the old rules, which was you would just count heads again. But a lot of people left thinking they would count the cards that they turned in. And so there was discrepancies, people saying, no, the cards were just a backup. And it's like, no, the cards were the vote. So you had people who they're saying, some of this alignment stuff just wasn't done right, which corrupts the data. That's not a transmission problem. That's a you just conducted this incorrectly problem. Theoretically, you have these cards, you can go do it, but what happened to them? This is one thing. There was stories last night that they were going to precinct captains' houses at midnight, 2 a.m., saying, give us the cards, give us the vote tally sheets. Because people were, this is where the technology comes in. They were trying to report the numbers up the chain, and they couldn't. People gave up. They went home. Taking vote tally sheets and vote cards, that's suboptimal. So then you have the issue about this app, and there's a lot of talk about that. Some people said it worked fine for them. Other people said they couldn't even download it over the last couple of days. And basically what happened, it seems, is a lot of people had trouble with the app or just didn't want to deal with technology. Maybe they're older. A lot of these people, more senior citizens get involved in volunteering to run this kind of thing. They had just decided, hey, we're just going to phone it in like we used to. Apparently, the Iowa Democrats did not plan on that. The phone was supposed to be a backup system. Suddenly, the majority of people are using the backup system, which it was not designed for, to handle that kind of traffic. It was supposed to be if, one or two people or 5% of people having trouble, not significant percentages of the people doing it. Also, it seemed like the regular helpline and the voting dial-in line were the same. So you had people saying, hey, I need help making this work, or I have a question about how to run the caucus. And they were competing with people trying to dial in votes. And the system just got overwhelmed. The Democratic Party is saying there was a problem in the coding. There's also the issue of they were expecting the precinct chairs to do the math. And Alex, you could talk about this. Some of that math is a little, it's basic, but kind of complicated because you're just dealing with ridiculous numbers. You have a large field, you're trying to determine viability, and then each precinct is assigned a state delegate equivalent. It could be like 0.36598, and you're trying to multiply it by all these different numbers. It was a lot for people to do. And so I think you had a technology problem, and you had a process problem, and then you had a disaster problem.
So, I mean, when you have a big event, right? Just even in your personal life, a wedding, for instance, you do a dress rehearsal, you do a practice. So what happened here? Like, why wasn't all of this tested before?
Well, this is the problem is, you have 1,700 something precincts, right? So you have 1,700 precinct chairs. This, again, is kind of the homemade nature of a caucus. It's really a giant Elks Club, sort of electing the grand poobah for the chapter. These aren't people that are paid on staff. They're not people that are going to carve out a ton of time. It also was entirely foreseeable. when they tried to say they were going to put out 3 sets of numbers when they had only put out 1 set previously, or just the idea of using a phone app for the first time. The history of that's not great. There were stories when this first broke that they were going to be using the phone app probably about 2 months ago, that there were cybersecurity concerns. And my thought was, you're not even going to get to the cybersecurity. It's just not going to work. It was entirely foreseeable. I think everybody had the best of intentions. I don't think there's anything nefarious. I just think, you're trying to do too much on too limited a scope. Just political parties aren't meant to do this kind of thing. It's not supposed to be this big. And that's why this is probably the last Iowa caucus we're going to see.
Or, caucuses in general. I mean, we're kind of leading up to Nevada. Nevada, Twitter was ablaze about how the Nevada Democratic Party's potentially using the same app that Iowa is. I'm sure there's a reporter on the ground trying to figure out what that answer is.
Nevada has a bigger problem.
What's that?
I was on a call last week. It was a national call with media and reporting services like Decision Desk HQ, and they were telling us what they're going to report and how they're doing it. So they're actually going to report the same type of numbers. They use county delegates as opposed to state delegate equivalents. First expression, second expression. They're also going to talk about total turnout. But Nevada does something really weird. They do early voting in a caucus, which strikes me as a bit of an oxymoron. Because the caucus is supposed to be you show up at a certain time, and everybody votes, and then everybody leaves. But they're going to do 4 days. They start voting February 13th, next Thursday. And they do 4 days of this. But this is what they said on the phone call. If you vote early in Nevada, and it's usually in Vegas, Clark County, is obviously the epicenter of the state. So you go vote early. They're going to take all those things after the 4 days, and they're going to reapportion them back to your home precinct. So say you live in, I don't know, what's a suburb of Vegas? Henderson?
Henderson, yeah.
You live in Henderson, you work in Vegas, you go on your lunch hour, your caucus, next Thursday, next Friday. The state's going to collect, the state party's going to collect all that. They're going to look at where you live. Then they're going to transmit that back to your home precinct. Okay, so I see a problem right there.
So we actually have a little bit of breaking news on this front. We're going to get that on the screen in just a second. But the Nevada Democrats have just announced that they will be dumping the app and the vendor used in Iowa. They say that they are confident that what happened in Iowa will not happen in Nevada.
I'm sure it won't.
And that they had already developed a series of backups and redundant reporting systems.
Uh-huh.
So,
this is what happens for the GOP, right? Is Iowa crashed and burned, and then the Iowa GOP was like, "Oh, we're going to try something new."
Yeah, the RNC came in and basically ran the caucus for Nevada, which look, they'll have to figure it out. I think the biggest thing is, and can we switch over to the slide we got on these campaigns? Look, Nevada, as we've talked about, Iowa does not really matter from a delegate standpoint. It's a small amount of delegates. It's more about the momentum you get afterwards. And so if you look at what the campaigns did last night, I mean, Amy Klobuchar, the savviest politician, said, "Fuck it, we're gonna go out and just give a speech." And with whatever's left on TV, and then all the other candidates followed. You've got Bernie's camp, you got Pete's camp releasing numbers. If you scroll down a little bit on this, Austin, so we can actually see it. Bernie's saying, and zoom in a little bit, Bernie's saying with 40% of precincts in Iowa, this is how he sees it. And, shocking, he sees himself, I believe, in this one, the winner. Look, I don't think anyone's lying here, but with 40% of the precincts you're tracking, these campaigns are basically trying to create their own narratives. And I think, having been on one of these before, if you're a campaign, even if it's a disaster, you have a pretty good idea of how it ended up, because you've got field organizing things in place, so you can get an idea, not all the precincts, but at least enough of them, so you get a good idea of how it's going. It's pretty telling what Bernie's saying, what Pete's saying, what Amy's saying, and what Biden's telling everyone not to do.
Yeah, if you think you did well, you did not send your lawyer out within an hour last night to say this is bullshit.
Yeah.
this is what's crazy to me, right? Like, about this caucus system at the moment, and what might be the final nail. At a time where like both sides of the political spectrum have very little confidence in our election system, Republicans, a lot of them, including the president, thinking that every illegal immigrant votes, and then on the Democratic side, thinking that every election is hacked by the Russians. You've got campaigns releasing clashing numbers and no official tally to sort of, check them against.
Well, and when the tally comes later this afternoon, there's going to be no one. They're going to be claiming it's bullshit. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
When Sanders released that was the end of sort of acceptable data from Iowa.
Yeah.
Because then it was just you're just fighting over versions of reality. Even if one or the other is entirely true, that's just not relevant. Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think after everything that's happened to this point and all the narratives are out there, what we sort of think happened with Sanders maybe narrowly winning, Buttigieg doing a little better, maybe even winning state delegates, Warren sort of in the middle of nowhere, and third, Biden doing worse than people expected in fourth, and Klobuchar claiming, sort of a close fifth.
Claiming the dark horse mantle, yeah.
Does anybody even really want real numbers to come out at this point? Is there any upside? I mean, it seems like they're all locked into their stories.
Well, we kind of want the numbers to come out because that's how we're going to do our model.
I get you want them.
But I say that flippantly, like, no, in reality, no one wants the numbers to come out. They're just like, we moved on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, unmitigated disaster is the only way I can describe last night. Unmitigated disaster. And it's the reason why I call it political firefest is, we don't have the tweet here, but like, I think it was a Ruby Kramer tweet. She was like, Troy Price had campaigned. He became Iowa chair based on his promise that this was going to be a well-run process. Up until basically it was over, this guy was telling everyone it's going to be the greatest caucus ever. Everyone show up. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. He had to have known, like, you don't fail this bad and not know a week ago it's going to be a rough night. Like, you just can't, or you're delusional. You're absolutely delusional.
The first tell was when at 8 Eastern, they didn't have the satellite caucuses.
Yeah.
Like, I was expecting sort of to be like Florida or an early vote state, right? Where it's just, okay, hey, these have been done for 2 hours, here you go.
Yeah.
And nothing. And they're like, ooh, that's no good.
Yeah. I think that just to close this out so we go to New Hampshire is, look, we discussed it before because, Drew, you were coordinating with the Iowa Dems, and, we have to work with them. We're members of the media, and we report this stuff out. But, I mean, we were commenting internally, like, this is going to be problems. Now, we didn't think it was going to be this bad, but we just knew there was going to be problems last night, and, this was on the edge of our confidence interval of how bad it was going to be. But we knew there was problems, and so, like, it's just, everyone, look, if you've been on a campaign, you don't go into an election night like this and not have dumpster fires to put out, but usually you find a way to figure it out. They just didn't find a way to figure it out last night. Yeah.
Real quick before we move on to New Hampshire, don't you think they're doubling down on their mistake by releasing a little over half of their results? Like, people are going to then have a new narrative about those results, which could very well be very different than the final results.
Is that the story that they're talking about, releasing half the results?
Yeah. At 4 p.m., what they're planning on doing is releasing about 50% of the precincts.
And you know what? None of those precincts are going to be the Yang precincts.
Yeah, at this point, honestly, if I was them, I'd just be like, "We'll let you know." Because really, everything's moved on. State of the Union is 2 hours or 4 hours after this partial release. Maybe that's kind of what they're banking on. There's the impeachment vote tomorrow, and then you're into Thursday, and the circus has moved on to New Hampshire. It's just like, and that gets back to my question. It's like, who wants these numbers out? I mean, what are these numbers going to tell us at this point? I get you need it for the model. I got that. But other than that, it's just, you're right. Nobody's going to be like, oh, thank God. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Because they're going to say, Bernie's going to be like, well, that's the 50% that wasn't part of my 40%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I would be telling them too. You'd be like, which precincts, and bring up the talking points. It's absolutely crazy.